Welcome back, Commanders. Today we're going to do a review of all of the new Astartes detachments that were released with the Liber Strategia. And we're going to do that in a way that's a little different from our usual how to use videos. Instead, we're going to do a general overview of each of the detachments and just make some initial evaluations of how effective the detachment is going to be in an Astartes army. And the criteria that we're going to use to do that are, as shown on the screen here. We're going to look first at whether or not the detachment has a clear role to play, and secondly, whether it is going to be effective in that role. Thirdly, we're going to look at whether that role is actually an important one that needs to be filled in an Astartes army. And then finally, whether or not that role is particularly common or in demand in the Astartes army list. And I do want to caveat all of this by saying that I have not had a chance to actually put these down on the table and use them in a game of Legions Imperialis yet. So this is all just an initial review based on a paper reading of the detachment's statistics and just comparing that with my general understanding of the game and its environment. So with all that out of the way, let's get started. The Vindicator is basically an armored gun carriage for the Demolisher cannon, and its role is to destroy structures. Now, it's pretty effective in this role. With its -3 AP value, you have a pretty good chance of doing a wound to a building. The problem is that with only one die firing per vehicle, you're going to really need to get quite a few of these into range of the structure you're trying to destroy in order to have a good chance of actually knocking it out. The problem with that, of course, is that with its low range and fairly low armor, I'm anticipating that a lot of these are going to be destroyed on their way to their target without having too much of a chance to actually engage the enemy. Now, if you support them well, you give the enemy enough other targets to deal with, it's possible that you could still get them close enough with enough of them to do enough damage to a structure with sufficient time to actually make a difference in the game. The problem is with destroying structures, I am not convinced that it's a particularly viable method of dealing with dug-in infantry, particularly if you're playing in a game that uses some kind of house rule where larger buildings have more wounds. You're really going to need to get a lot of these very close. And the fact that most of the time a Legions Imperialis game is decided by force majeure on turn 3, just simply by the fact that games tend to run pretty long and you probably are not going to go past turn 3. If the game is decided that quickly, I don't think it's, in my experience anyway, I don't really think that you're going to have enough time to destroy a structure and have it make much of a difference in the overall course of the game. The exclusivity of this particular role of destroying structures, the Astartes list doesn't have easy access to the Demolisher cannon. It does have a few other options like the Melt-a-Blast gun on the Kratos. There are a few things here and there that give them the ability to destroy structures. But the purpose of destroying a structure is probably to knock out infantry that are hiding inside of it. And I feel like the Astartes list has several other options available to them to take out infantry that are dug in a structure. So that's why I'm rating the exclusivity as moderate here. As far as the cost goes, this vehicle is fairly costly, I think, for the capabilities that it brings to the Astartes list, especially compared to the chassis that it's based on, the Predator. I really am not sure that I would take this particular vehicle for the purpose that it's intended to fill in the army. And so for that reason, we're going to give this a D rating. The Whirlwind is the first of 2 Astartes artillery pieces that we've received in the Liber Strategia. And it's fairly clear that this is intended, the Whirlwind is intended to destroy infantry in cover. and also potentially provide general purpose against walkers and light vehicles. With its 0 AP, even though it doesn't have a weapon trait that restricts its potential targets, that 0 AP is pretty limiting. Now, it does have a 30-inch range, which means as an artillery piece, it's got a decent coverage when you place it down on the table. The only problem that I see is that its effectiveness is going to be fairly moderate. It does ignore cover, which is obviously one of the reasons you might take this particular detachment. But it is, it's just a lot of points to kill infantry. And as we talked about with the Vindicator detachment, the Astartes list has already some very effective ways to deal with infantry in cover, particularly given the fact that this is a barrage weapon. If you're firing it at long range, even at something that's in cover, which you ignore, the fact that you're going to be hitting on fives means you're going to need to take a lot of these vehicles in order to effectively deal with a large detachment of infantry in a structure in a reasonable amount of time. Again, we have to consider time in our calculations whenever we're dealing with something in Legions Imperialis. So, are you going to be able to destroy enough infantry in enough time, in a short enough time, to make a difference on the table? And with this, my opinion is that you're going to spend too many points to make it really effective at that role. So I think this might be a good backup unit to provide support for an advance, but this is probably not going to be something that you're going to take exclusively to deal with one problem or another. The importance of the role that the Whirlwind fills obviously is very high, right? Like dealing with infantry in a structure is a very challenging problem in Legions Imperialis, and it needs to be done quickly and effectively. And this is probably not the weapon to use for that. The importance, the exclusivity, is again moderate, just because there are other detachments in the Astartes list that can deal with infantry and cover. Again, the cost is fairly moderate, but for what it is intended to do, I think it is just too high. So this is a better choice, I think, than the Vindicator, but it's still probably in the C tier for me. The Scorpius is the second of the two artillery units, detachments, that we've received. Its role, as far as I can tell, is to destroy heavy infantry and walkers, because it is a light AT weapon with AP -2. And so that AP is really only going to be useful against infantry and walkers and detachments of that kind. So you're probably not going to see too much effectiveness against other targets. Even things like dreadnoughts you are not going to get the full effect of that AP value, simply because dreadnoughts across the board have a 5-up invulnerable save now. So this is a detachment that I don't really clearly see a defined role for, in the consideration that its effectiveness seems fairly moderate at best. The importance of destroying heavy infantry and walkers with a vehicle like this is pretty low. There are a lot of other detachments in the Astartes list that can deal with heavy infantry and walkers, and spending as many points as you're going to have to spend on these Scorpius detachments is probably not going to be particularly points efficient, especially when you're considering that it is a very low range. I think it's 18 inches, and it is also more expensive than the Whirlwind. So for the Scorpius, we're going to rate this as an F. This is not something that I would recommend taking. The Mastadon is a heavy assault transport. There's no question about that. It is armed to the teeth. It has 3 wounds, void shields, a good movement value, lots of armor, and even an air defense capability. So this is the premier Astartes heavy transport. You can put dreadnoughts in it. it is going to be extremely effective at getting your assault units where they need to be and then supporting them with both anti-infantry and anti-tank weaponry. Now, is this something that's super important? The Astartes have a lot of ways to get infantry and even dreadnoughts up the table with termites, drop pods, even aerial transports. Now, the advantage of this is, of course, that the Mastadon is not going to scatter on impact. It's not going to get shot down by anti-air fire. So if you want something, I'm picturing like something in football, right, compared to throwing a pass versus running straight up the middle. The Mastodon is your ground game. And so this is probably a good way to introduce some diversity into your assault list, where you can force the enemy to have to cover multiple angles, multiple avenues of approach to the objective. And the fact that it has so many wounds, it has void shields, means the enemy is going to have to devote a lot of firepower to knocking these out. Now, there are a lot of assault transports in the Astartes list already. You have the Spartan, the Land Raider, and then of course, the aerial transports that I already named. So this isn't filling a particularly arid role in the Astartes list, but it is going to provide, I think, an important capability just because it is so durable and it allows you to get what you want where you want it without any kind of risk or scatter, other than obviously the normal enemy action that will try to counter any assault of this kind. The Mastodon is a very high costed unit, which just makes sense for the capabilities that it brings. And for that reason, probably more than any other, I'm going to give this a B. This is not something that you're going to be able to take, I don't think, on its own and just push it up the table. It is going to need some support from other units, which means that you're going to be investing a lot of points in this assault. And if the enemy is able to knock it out or slow it down before it's able to make a difference on the table, you're going to have invested a lot for nothing. The Cerberus is another detachment whose role is crystal clear from the get-go. Its job is to neutralize heavy armor, knights, and titans, and I think it seems to be very effective at this role. It fires a lot of dice, it has a good hit value, its main weapon has a long range. I think it may be the longest ranged Astartes anti-tank weapon in the list currently. And it is, with the shock pulse trait on its main gun, is going to be a very dangerous weapon against enemy knights and titans and even super heavy tanks, just because it's going to slow them down, it's going to reduce their firepower, and it's going to mean that that very expensive enemy tank, enemy knight, or enemy titan is going to be losing a lot of its capability, even if the Cerberus fails to damage it. Now, the importance of this is, I think, fairly moderate. I mean, Knights and Titans did get a boost in the Liber Strategia, so I'm thinking we're going to see more and more of them on the table. But these are still not necessarily game winners. They're not objective takers. And so I think the fact that this is a very effective weapon against them, just because they're not necessarily game winners, I think the importance of being able to deal with Knights and Titans is not a critical game-winning feature. Unless, of course, in your local area you are playing a lot against Collegia Titanica lists, then it may be much more important for you to have weapons capable of dealing with Titans. I will say one of the things that does really help the Cerberus is the fact that the Astartes list doesn't really have access to a lot of weapons with similar capability, right? The neutron laser that the Cerberus has, is a powerful and pretty rare weapon. And so the fact that it has such a long range, has such a good AP value, has such good weapon traits, there's not a lot in the list that can really compete with it. So you are going to pay a high cost for it. But I think this is definitely a detachment that you're going to want to see in your Astartes list, particularly if you're finding yourself facing off against a lot of super heavies, knights, and titans. So we're going to give this a B rating because it is effective against something that the Astartes don't necessarily have a lot of tools to deal with. But it's probably not super efficient against stuff that is not a super heavy, a knight, or a titan. So this is definitely not a multi-role vehicle. The Typhon also has a very clear role with that giant cannon. This is just basically the Vindicator's big brother, and its job is to destroy structures and potentially heavy armor, although its low range of 16 inches means it's probably not going to do too well going up against other heavy vehicles. So it is, I think, a very effective unit against structures because it fires so many dice. It has a good hit value. It hits on threes and it has AP -4, which means you're going to be doing quite a few wounds to another structure. And it's likely, if you have 2 or 3 of these in a detachment, you're almost certainly going to destroy a structure that you fire at. Again, the problem is that destroying structures, I feel, takes too long, and it's just not necessarily worth it for the points that you pay for this detachment. Because, as we've talked about before with the Vindicator and the Whirlwind, there are other tools in the Astartes army list to deal with infantry and structures that I am just not sure that this is the best choice for filling that role. Yes, it's cool to destroy structures, but in my experience, I haven't found it to be particularly effective, particularly in the time that it often takes to destroy the structure. Now, this Typhon does have, as we just mentioned, the number of dice that it fires, the fact that it's going to be hitting a building on 2s with the +1 to hit a structure, means it is going to be able to do decent damage to an enemy structure. But for the cost, the fact that there are other detachments capable of filling this role, I'm just not sure it's worth it. So we're going to give this a C rating. This is something that it's probably not bad to take, but it's probably more something for if you like the detachment, you think it's cool to drive it up the table and destroy structures, then yeah, take it. But I think if you're trying to be very points efficient, competitive even, this is probably not the detachment for you. So on the whole, I have to say that these detachments seem to be a bit of a mixed bag. They are some iconic detachments that we've been waiting quite a while for, but I think for the most part, these are not necessarily detachments that I would take if I was trying to be particularly competitive. I think the Mastadon and the Cerberus are the 2 standout detachments of the 6. They have a pretty clear role, and they seem to be pretty effective in filling that role. The problem is they're pretty specialized. So they may not be the best choice for a mainline generalist army list, and maybe something better suited to an army that is focused on filling a particular role, perhaps in your local meta or in a tournament or other event list, where you have a particular enemy, a particular operational environment that you're expecting to be in. The Typhon and the Vindicator, I think, are more detachments I would take just for fun rather than for a particular, effective role to fill in an army list. I mean, they're cool models, and I think they're neat, and just taking them for fun is definitely perfectly valid. The Whirlwind, I think, is okay, but again, maybe not something that I would choose if I was up against a particularly hard fight. The Scorpius, I don't even particularly really understand what this detachment is supposed to do, and I'm wondering if it's been misprinted, if it's supposed to be an AT weapon rather than light AT, but we'll have to wait and see. Let me know if you've had a chance to put these on the table and if your experiences match up with my recommendations, my thoughts on these. And as always, I enjoy talking with you guys about the game. So please leave your thoughts down below in the comments.